It was almost 8 years ago I heard about this guy named Olly Bridge. Now, he was breaking ground in workplace health and wellbeing. It was really, really groundbreaking stuff at the time, and it's taken us both this long to finally meet. And what better moment than celebrating the last day of Men's Health Week on air at 3WBC. Olly Bridge has dedicated his life to helping individuals and teams recognise their full potential and achieve extraordinary results. With a career founded within elite athletes from Formula One and Olympic gymnastics, Olly has harnessed the power of sustainable peak performance and honed it into a dynamic methodology that extends far beyond the sports arena. Now, since then, Olly's led high-performance teams in prestigious organisations like BMW and Medibank, gaining a deep understanding of the delicate balance between performance and well-being. Oh, he's here with me right now, gagging to just give me a shot at this, Rae. We're going to have a deep dig into what it feels like being Olly Bridge. Welcome to the show, Olly.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm out of breath.
Take a breath.
Am I an elite speaker, maybe?
You absolutely are.
Well, I don't mean that in a brag way, just more elite in the performance and the physical endurance required to speak at a rate of knots all the time. What does it feel like being you today, Olly?
Feels pretty special, actually. You say it's been 8 to 10 years since we first connected, and actually getting the time to speak to you, and it feels really special, to be honest, and for it to fall on the day that it is, the final day of Men's Health Week, and just a real privilege. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And technically, really, the last day of Men's Health Week was yesterday, but it feels like Sunday is the last day of the week, but technically it's the first.
Yeah, I've never really understood that Sunday isn't the last day, it's the first day of the next week. It's never really resonated with me.
That's right.
And I'm not sure whether it's the English thing that the calendar does start, or the week starts on a Monday for me. But I'd class. Can we class it as the last day just for us, just for this session?
Well, we can tack one more day on, make it an 8-day week, an 8-day Men's Health Week. But I wonder if anyone can look that up for me who's listening in. Why is the first day of the week Sunday? However, the world really starts it on the Monday. Anyway, I'll never forget the first day I reached out to you back in 2014. I've got one of those memories that I know exactly where I was. I was sitting at Beyond Blue. I was working on the Heads Up workplace mental health program, which was very new, and it was based on world's first research into the state of mental health in Australian workplaces. And you were a voice and you were a name that just kept on coming up for me all the time in your role at Medibank. Now, since then, we've had a conversation literally 2 minutes ago about what that role meant. I was completely misconstrued about what it was, in terms of I felt it was very groundbreaking. You were probably the only mental health and wellbeing resource I could see that corporates were really embracing at the time. But you actually have a little different perspective on that. And I want you to now take the floor or the stage or the panel and tell us about this role at Medibank all the way back 10 years ago.
Yeah, so my role there was to create an additional business line for Medibank, which was beyond just selling health insurance to people. So we had lots of corporate partners, like a Rio Tinto or a bank or wherever, and we were offering a discount to the health insurance to their employee network. And the idea was we could do so much more. We were a healthcare company that could offer a far better way to look after their people if we gave them more than just an insurance product. So my vision was that we were going to change the corporate health and wellbeing landscape by making it easier, cheaper, simpler to actually build a health and wellbeing proposition around the insurance product. So if you think about a typical corporate, they're offering a 7-10% discount on health insurance if they go through a particular health insurer. Oh, and what happens if we also got our lunch and learns and our flu jabs and our executive health checks and all of the other things that we wanted to do to offer to our employees? That was the theory. And so the business case needed to be built, and the business case initially was actually that will make us partners with these corporates rather than just a supplier of health insurance, and stickier relationships and much deeper relationships where we could help them with the wicked problems that they were facing. And that's what I did. So we built a proposition around the health insurance product that was really successful. And it's different than I think where your head was at in terms of I wasn't looking after, on a day-to-day basis anyway, I wasn't looking after the 5,000 Medibank employees. I was actually looking after what I hoped would be corporate Australia.
I love every day that I learn something new. And so I did learn something new. But the first questions now that come into my head, and there's quite a few of them, is did you get the feeling that Medibank were genuinely invested in their members' well-being, or was this a purely commercial move?
Someone once said to me that you've got to make money to make a difference. So yes, there needed to be a business case and it needed to stack up. Now, that's not a dirty thing that you need to take a shower after you say, because ultimately it made us a sustainable business that was able to make more of an impact tomorrow than we were today. So there was a commercial end to it, but it was a deep-seated desire for the business to make a change in people's health, whether it be the members, whether it be the employees of the partnerships that they had. They really wanted to make a difference and still do. It is an amazing business, and I cherish the 8 years that I spent at Medibank and the people that I met.
Yeah.
But it is a big corporate. It's listed and it's got a lot of...
well, it has to exist for its members, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's got a lot of frameworks and structures and forms to sign. And I'd come from a very small privately owned startup. And so you sometimes look at the other side of the fence and you think, oh, you know what? I've been in this startup, fight for everything, really on a mission, on a real passion project called Global Corporate Challenge. And I'd been there for about 5 years, and I think I was employee number 6. And it really was, you had a good sales deck on PowerPoint, and we were going around the country trying to sell the dream of a physical activity program. And we'd grown enormously. So when I left 5 years later, we were in 130 odd countries, and we'd grown from the 7 employees we were up to about 140 employees. And I'd seen a huge amount of change. But in that kind of environment, you get a little bit disillusioned by just think what we could do if we had more people or more money or more impact. So going to a large listed organization like Medibank, I thought, brilliant. You'll have deep pockets and lots of money and lots of smart people, and this will be brilliant. But like most things, you love what's new, and then you start to love what you had before, in terms of you could come up with an idea on a Monday and you execute it by Friday in the startup. In Medibank, that wasn't the case. You had many sign-offs and many business cases and many road shows of trying to get support and all the stakeholders on board. So it's like everything. There's great stuff in it, and there's some challenging stuff in it, no matter whether you're in a small startup or in a listed business. And I've had the fortune in my career of being in both multiple times. And you wish you could get a blend of both, but that's your job, right? You're trying to bring in the agile nature of a startup into a large organization if you can, but utilizing the funds and all of the smart people that you have in a big business, but not getting weighed down by all the bureaucracy and trying to speed it up.
Well, that's right. And I love that you've painted that, picture of balance around, how impact is made. We do need money and we do need strength to be able to bring that, but then also we need the focus of smaller spaces. But I always say to people, never underestimate the impact that you have. Quite often we're looking, intrinsically, extrinsically around things, but, you as an individual, the impact that you make. And as you were talking, and as I'm discovering more about this role at Impact, at Medibank, I did a number of speaking events at Medibank through myself and Beyond Blue. And I remember it was a number of years ago, and it was quite a big presentation, and a girl came and spoke to me later, and you might even know of this little program, and she was new to Medibank. at the time. And you know what it's like when you go to a new business and people, the human condition will automatically sense danger through lack of familiarity. So a lot of new people will be, you know, you're at the tea room and people are looking down and they're not engaging with you. And she really felt this. And I think she was also not native to Australia. Anyway, she said to me she started this little program and it was called Just Say Hello. She had she showed me she had like little signs made that she put up all around the office, and it took off. It really, really took off that people actually, and I think she had T-shirts made as well, just say hello.
Oh, lovely.
And that was, you know, that could have been, you know, as part of, you know, Medibank's, you know, holistic address to wellbeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of evidence around, you know, the amygdala hijack of people constantly in that fight or flight mechanism of where is the danger? Who are you, a friend or are you a foe? And, you know, unless you put it beautifully in terms of that human condition, it is natural for us to be scanning the environment to say, am I in a safe place? Am I not? And we also know the evidence shows we get far more out of ourselves when we do feel safe. And so if we aren't saying hello, if we aren't doing those natural or should be natural things of trying to get people to feel safe and trying to make people feel like, you know what, you can just relax. What happens, happens. Let's just be humans. I think it's a beautiful way of having an impact. And I think you're right. When you say anyone can have an impact, you don't need the title to have that impact. And I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know about that initiative around Medibank. I'm not sure what years
Maybe it wasn't as big as she painted it. I've never forgotten it myself.
But isn't that lovely, right? She had a massive impact on you. And whether it was as big as she said it was or whatever, had an impact on you. And we're having a conversation about it now. And it's a kernel of an idea that other people can take into their workplaces.
Well, I've shared it with so many of my other clients who have picked it up.
Yeah.
So yes,
isn't that amazing?
The reverberation has been quite massive.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that there is a beauty in the organic way that people can have an impact on the people around them. You know, they say we are the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. Well, good or bad, a lot of the time, the 5 people that we spend the most time with are often our work friends and the people that we work with. And there is a body of evidence that shows that the people that we spend our time with at work, they need to be friends. And if they're not, and if you are going to a workplace where you don't have someone that you would call a friend, it has a really detrimental impact on our lives. And so that is important. And being that positive deviant of starting something for the positive lunchtime walks, or hey, how about we take this meeting outside and rather than the meeting room, or I'm going to bring a fruit platter rather than the party pies to the workshop. You know, those little social deviant things that we can do really add up. And it's not just about, did that Just Say Hello campaign work in Medibank? It may or may not have done, I don't know, but it had an impact on you, and you've spread it to numerous organizations, and hopefully that kernel then sat with somebody else and they've done the same. And you know, those 3 degrees of separation, rather than talking about Kevin Bacon, but actually the impact that you can have is huge.
That's right. And if you don't believe it, again, I remember back in the Heads Up Beyond Blue launch days, and Jeff Kennett had this mission, 99% of Australian workforces have to make mental health a priority. Thinking, how the hell are we going to be able to do that? But part of that was, the commercial proposition, the value proposition there. So if you don't believe that people turning up to your workplace, being engaged and feeling happy isn't a thing, well, then just look at absenteeism, presenteeism, all that kind of stuff. It does impact your bottom line. And you made a point, Olly, about, having a friend in the workplace. People tend to like working with people that they like.
Yeah.
So, number one, be likable and, foster, environments of friendliness, perhaps.
Yeah, and look at what would you like someone to do for you, and then you do it for someone else.
Yeah, and maybe that's just say hello.
Yeah, I know.
It doesn't have to be, it doesn't even have to be a party pie. It can be just say hello. So take that, everyone. Write that down. Go and do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
End of show. Goodbye. But, really good points coming up so far. And I'm wondering, in such a big space that, I know Medibank is a really, really big, chunky, clunky organisation. I don't think it tries to be everything to everyone, but it kind of is by nature of its product. Did you ever feel like really out of your depth?
That's not a feeling that I remember from those days, if I'm honest. I had an amazing people leader, the best people leader I've ever.
Can't name that person.
I think he'd blush too much,
Really?
but he knows who he is because I tell him all the time. He's still a mentor of mine.
Give him a shout out.
But he was incredible at dropping truth bombs that he didn't know were truth bombs. He once said to me, "Hey, let's change things or get fired trying." And that's something that stuck with me from that moment on. And I've actually said it to countless people since then. Life's about making a difference. And if that difference isn't bought into by everyone around you or the people that are making the decisions, well, then you probably shouldn't be where you are.
Can you say that again?
Make a difference or get fired trying.
Oh, right, that one on your wall as well. I love that.
And I love the authenticity of it. And it came up in a really organic conversation. And if you asked him, he probably doesn't remember saying it. But
did anyone ever follow that instruction and actually get fired?
Yes.
Oh.
Absolutely. And I don't think fired is the term that they would use, but certainly
gently moved on.
Yeah, I think you realise that actually maybe this isn't the place where I need to be.
Yeah.
And opportunities arise as a result of that. But the feeling of out of your depth is a natural feeling that I wanted to, from a very early age, get used to. Not because I was a sadist or I had any real want to feel uncomfortable, but actually more that I knew that meant growth.
Right.
And that feeling of out of your depth, that feeling of, to a certain degree, that being out of your depth but supported.
Yeah. Because I get a sense that maybe that person that moved on might have been you, but I also know that during this time at Medibank, and I don't know how you fit all this in, but you also had your own initiative bubbling along in the background, which has really come to life, in more recent years. Build a Bridge, your own consultancy. How was that sort of something that was really, dare I say, building at the same time?
It absolutely was. So I this all became very, very organic for me because my best friend in the UK, who's a firefighter, he once said to me, "Ollie, I started as a fireman because I wanted to save lives and fight fires. I can't even smell smoke from my office now." And it really resonated with me. This is 2 decades ago. And so the beauty of that comment really resonated with me because I started my career working with elite athletes, partly because I knew I wasn't good enough at sport myself and I needed to be involved in it, and the only way was to support those athletes that were good enough. Working with those athletes, when you did something great with them, you saw the magic. You felt the absolute fire in their belly just explode. You saw the whites of their eyes. I was a PT for years, and I had the same thing with my own personal clients. The more senior I got in my corporate career, which I knew I needed to do to meet mortgages and pay school fees and whatever, the further away from that magic I got. And the amount of bureaucracy or the amount of business cases and so on that I needed to write were just energy depleting. And when my friend said this statement to me, I realized that I needed some counterweight. I needed some way of finding that magic again. And so I started Build a Bridge to help people build their bridge to their best life and to their best performance. And I did it because I knew that filled up my gas tank. It filled up my energy reserves to be able to then do the things I knew I needed to do in the corporate world that depleted my energy. So doing the political stuff and doing the backbenching and building business cases and getting support for things, that's not something that I love to do, but I know it's necessary. Being with a group of people, being on stage at a conference and talking to them is honestly magic to me. And I just love it. And I knew that when my friend in the UK said what he said to me, I realized the same thing was happening in my life. And so how could I counterbalance that? And that's where Build a Bridge was born out of, because I knew, and back then it wasn't, there weren't such terms as side hustle or passion projects. They were kind of dirty little secrets. Nobody wanted to employ you when they knew that you were doing something else on the side back then. And so I started this way back when I was working at BMW, and it was a dirty little secret. I told no one. When I went and did an engagement or worked with someone, I kept it completely quiet. As time has progressed, though, it's become almost a little bit more socially accepted or commercially accepted that it's okay for people to have passion projects.
Yeah,
so
especially
much,
since COVID.
Absolutely. And so much so that I now have it written into my contracts. I'm the COO of a large organisation that's joint listed on the ASX and the NASDAQ. And part of my contract is that I'm able to continue to do Build a Bridge because it is my lifeblood.
Yeah.
It is something that I need and love, that I wouldn't be able to do as good in my corporate job if I didn't have Build a Bridge in my life.
Can I push a little sidebar into that, Ollie? You mentioned that, about dirty little secret, but also you have to recognise the reality of school fees and commitments that, being wedded to a more substantial job is really important. Again, in light of International Men's Health Week, a few of those conversations I've had literally with men during the week and before that even, around the expectation of men that they need an occupation that will serve a family. And men who actually have other aspirations or even very deep-seated feelings of wanting to be doing something different. Like a man I was working with wants to photograph birds but can't because he has 3 kids in private school and that is not going to pay those fees. Do you think that we're getting any further down the track? And I mentioned COVID was a good platform to allow people to have these / careers and other interests. But do you think for men we're getting any further down the track of shifting this burden of responsibility for others that forms, I guess, the reality of what career or occupation they can have? Don't know if that made sense.
I think it does make sense. I'm incredibly lucky. My wife is a very successful lady, and she's the CEO of KX Pilates, and she's incredible. And I love what I do. And together, we need to make sure that we provide for the family, my little girl and little boy, an environment and a life that we can be proud of, that we can smile about, and they have joy in their hearts. So it is absolutely a partnership. So my desire to do both the corporate thing and my own business is born out of needing to play my part in that partnership and in that family, and also what I just discussed in terms of my own energy level. And I'm sure Selena would say similar things.
What's your wife's name?
Selena.
Hi, Selena. Is Selena listening in?
Well, she's actually just flying back from Singapore. She's been in Singapore for the week with work. So
wow.
I think she's in the air, but she did say she'd listen to the cut that will be on YouTube.
Yeah. So just a little, if she's flying back from Singapore for work, that has to do with Pilates?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you want to give a little shout out for what she does?
Yeah, so she's the CEO of KX Pilates, the bottle that I've actually got here. So they are a network of Pilates studios that it's a franchise model. They've opened up in Jakarta and globally quite recently in Singapore. But they've got about 100 studios in Australia, and it is an amazing form of physical activity that is not just about rehabbing from knee surgery or I've twisted my ankle, I can't. It is an amazing form of physical activity. So it is a different philosophy on Pilates as well. So it's a more high intensity workout. And so it is outstanding. And it's shown that by the way it's grown and how now it's growing internationally and how amazing Selena is at what she does and the team that she has around her.
Yeah.
But going back to your question around, do you feel like people have the opportunity to follow their
Probably
pathway?
more men.
Okay. And the realities of life and meeting certain financial requirements and so on is never, unfortunately, never going to go away. So finding that balance, and that's why I was trying to get across, for us as a family, we know what we need to hit, and so as a partnership, we break it down as to how we're going to hit that. Yeah. Now, my philosophy would be, if I could have, years and years and years ago, I Build a Bridge started, I think, 13, 14 years ago. So if I could have done that as my only source of income, I'd have really struggled for a few years, and we weren't in a financial position to be able to do that. What I've learned, though, over the years is I actually really like the balance. I really, really like the balance of running, at the moment, a global business and having teams that report into me and being responsible for their careers and their development, and running high performance teams in that environment, while also running my own business as well. Yeah. And so the balance of that, because I think being a sole trader or running your own business, it can be incredibly lonely.
Yes.
And during COVID, I think that really came home to roost as well. So the ability to have both is a blessing, but it's a blessing that I didn't actively go for. It was something that happened for other reasons, and those reasons were financial reasons.
Yeah.
So going back to your point around, could somebody follow a career that is taking photos of birds? If there is the market out there, which I don't know, but if there is the market there and it hits your financial requirements, then absolutely. I think the ego of I am a X and the title, that is still around. Is it reducing? I don't know. I think people have to have a real hard look at themselves and say, why am I doing this? If I am unhappy, am I doing it from ego? Am I doing it for financial reasons and I have to? There is a whole plethora of different reasons why I think people do things like that.
Well, that's right. And you look at the social determinants for men, cultural, education, location, socioeconomic, that all of those things are determinants in relation to what I'm saying, I guess. And that's not to say that you sit in this really privileged position where you can make choices, but there's a whole range of reasons why these things end up. And you're right, I think that there has been a massive shift in identity through occupation. And like you, I started my own business, back in 2010, actually. But was always wedded to another organisation at the same time to enable me to raise my family as well. And that was the reality of it. But also, like you, I feel very grateful to have a balance where I can turn up to be with people, but then also turn up for myself. And then in the last, 6 years, then I've been, completely on my own, which sometimes can be very, very lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, I was incredibly grateful not to only be doing my own thing during COVID.
Yeah,
COVID, I think, was hard on a lot of areas, and certainly some verticals in work, and certainly conferences, workshops, working with groups. If I had only be doing Build a Bridge, then I would have really struggled.
Oh, when you love a stage and a microphone, it was a very, very black and white time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Now, it is time for a break, Olly. In fact, I thought, how do we fill up 2 hours? Which was kind of a joke in my head. I knew that we would find that very, very easy. But there are a few things I still want to probably spill over into the next segment. But for now, we come to the very first break in the show where I prepare to play our very first special guest song request. Bit of a game attached to this.
Okay.
So I give you a cryptic clue. So you've given me 4 songs.
Yep.
And I'm playing them in a particular order that came to me, like lottery. So I give you a clue and you have to guess which song it is and then tell me what significance this song has.
Oh, gosh, no pressure.
Okay, so you ready? So it could have to do with the title or the artist.
Okay.
So this clue is a depth in which you should never dive head first.
Is this Shallow?
Correct.
So all of the 4 songs that I sent over to you are not necessarily my favourite songs that I would go and do something to, but they all really, really have a deep-seated meaning in my life. So each of the songs talk to something really special. And they're not always the most beautiful or poetic reasons. So the reason why I sent Shallow over is it comes from the movie that came out a few years ago, A Star Is Born, which is a pretty full-on movie. It's a pretty harrowing story, and I think a pretty real story. But I wish that I had much more of a deep reason than what I'll go into. The reason why I chose this story is this song, is because my wife and I were having an argument that day, and we'd already bought tickets to go and see the movie. And it was ridiculous as it sounds. Got to the point where we got to the cinema, and my wife had lost the tickets on her phone. She couldn't find them, and I was huffing and puffing, and all of the other baggage of the day before and the argument and so on was there. And this was my opportunity to give her the silent treatment. And, you can't even get the tickets right. And my wife and I have been together for over 20 years. So those that have had long-term relationships will, I think, resonate with that sort of story. And it was my opportunity to get a one-up. And the beauty, and I'm a big fan of movies, and I love the theatre. I love escapism. I love just 2 hours where you lose yourself in something else. And so we went in, sat down, weren't talking to each other. And the movie was so beautiful, and the movie was so powerful, that by the time we left, we were hugging, we were in love again. It was the most special realization of, sometimes to get out of an emotion, out of a feeling, you need to just get away. Mentally, physically, they say emotion is 90% motion. So often I talk about going for a run or moving, but moving away from where you find yourself. And this movie did this for us, unbeknownst to us. It wasn't an intentional thing. It wasn't a strategy. It was just fortuitous. But when I'm in those moments, I think about just how different we were going in through those doors and how different we were when we left and came out of those doors, because of the way this movie affected us and the way that we could just emotionally give ourselves to this movie. And this was the most famous song from that movie.
Wow, I'm absolutely mesmerised. I'm so glad I've got you on the show today, Olly Bridge. When we come back, we're going to wind back the clocks and go all the way back to where the bridge started building, little Olly Bridge. So you're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. Do not go away. Oh, welcome back. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC, and you're here with Rae Bonney and Olly Bridge. And we just heard Shallow by Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. Now, Olly Bridge, he's a very well-known personality and pioneer in the health and wellbeing space. Before we continue, though, for those of you who follow my work, will know that this past week has been a celebration of International Men's Health Week, which has resonated in such a positive and collaborative and massive reach this year. I've not seen it ever before, so I can't imagine what next year is going to be like. But in acknowledgement of all of this, I'd like to take a little moment to share something I've borrowed from Gillian Hunt. Now, Jill is one of my pin-up people. Not only is she the CEO of Parents Beyond Breakup, that encompasses life-saving organisation Dads in Distress, but also our illustrious president at the Australian Men's Health Forum. We're the peak body for men's health here in Australia. But I've adapted her piece for today. So here goes. For International Men's Health Week 2023 and all the other days, I'd like to recognise the work being done in men and boys' health within our communities, Australia and the world, paying our respects to all those with lived experience of trauma and ill health in this space, no matter its form. We would like to honour all those who have gone before us in raising awareness for the essential needs of men and boys in health and life. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We would also like to consider humbleness and service in gratitude to those who have served the men and boys of our world, and thank you for allowing us to serve you all now. Thank you for letting me share that piece, and and sharing my emotion as well. Thank you. Now, Olly,
Yeah.
your accent may give it away, but tell us where did you start life?
So I was born in a town about half an hour south of London in the UK, a place called Guildford, a pretty large commuting village, town into the city. I was born into a very loving family. I've got an older sister who's 4 years older, and my father was an accountant, he retired a few years ago, but still identifies as an accountant, I think, as many do. And I had a privileged upbringing. It was beautiful. I went through junior school, and my father did work long hours. So he would be gone in the morning, probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to drive to London. And he wouldn't be back until 9, 10 o'clock at night. So,
wow, what's the commute time for?
it's about 40 minutes. So it's not like it's a long
Guildford.
commute. Guildford to the city. But he worked long hours. He was a partner. It was a worldwide accountancy firm, and he was an amazing dad, but he wasn't around much during the week.
What made him amazing?
He was a bit of a softie at his heart, but he. So the reason why I say that, and I'm stumbling on my words because sometimes it's hard to put into words how people make you feel. So he made me feel incredibly supported, incredibly loved, incredibly supported, but in equal measure, incredibly pushed, incredibly motivated. He never once missed one of my rugby games at the weekends, but during the week I knew he was grafting for us as a family. He created an environment with my mum that allowed my mum to be, on the most part, stay-at-home mum and looking after the family and looking after the household. My schooling, I then went to boarding school when I was 12, 13. And that's not easy. You know, I went from being the top of a school in junior school and sport and so on to living with 19-year-olds in a boys' house. It was a single-sex school for the first couple of years, and then became co-ed in the final 2. And that's really hard. You know, the difference between a 13-year-old and an 18, 19-year-old is not only physically very different, but mentally and emotionally incredibly different. And, you know, this is way back when that, you know, that you would be assigned a senior boy, not that I see now here in Australia so beautiful that you get assigned an older child to look after you as a younger child. This is more, you do everything that you have to do, that you get asked to by the senior boys. So clean their shoes, polish their shoes, bring them their toast, you know, it's typical things that you'd imagine in old school English boarding school. But it was a real tale of two cities, because my first 2 or 3 years, mainly 2, were horrendous and really, really challenging from a bullying perspective, from a fitting in, for feeling belonging, and also that culture shock of being the oldest and in the junior school to the lowest of the low in the senior school. But then the final 3 years were amazing because you kind of found your voice a little bit more, and because I'd gone through the really tough times, it had taught me resilience and taught me sort of strategies to be able to get through tough times. And I'm embarrassed to say this, I only had this realization at Christmas, because I took my wife, we went back to the UK for Christmas, and I took my wife around the school. And it's, if you imagine Hogwarts, it's a bit like that. It is a dramatically beautiful school and grounds with large buildings and oil paintings on the wall, and certain words made up for certain things, just like every cult has. But as I was showing my wife around, she pointed out to me that actually where I thought I was expressing pride and love for the school, what I actually probably was more likely to be showing was just, I was really proud that I got through it. And I was really proud that I came out as head of sport, head boy, head prefect. You know, I had all of these accolades. But, and, seeing my name on the wall and so on, and the history of a very old school, I was proud of that. But actually, I was proud that I got through it, and I'm proud that I found a way and a strength to be able to put up with a lot of the things that you have to put up with and get through. And actually, those years created the routine and the ability for me to succeed later on in life and go through hard times. But it took a long time and another voice to actually explain that to me, because actually the story I was telling myself about school and actually what the reality was were different.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it's a tale of two cities, because the first couple of years and the final couple of years were different. But I just feel a huge amount of pride that I left with 3 A's at A level, which is kind of the final exams, which opened up medicine or whatever
Yes.
university course I wanted to do, and the other accolades on the sports field or getting to the first rugby and so on.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
Ollie, or even just observe, some ears might interpret that, the early years of all of that, trauma and challenge that you had in, you mentioned bullying and things like that. But then the last 3 years, coming into yourself and because of that resilience building, ears might interpret that was necessary to get you to a place, that those hard years. Do you think that's how that picture is painted for people, not just boys, but girls as well, that once we've experienced something that's quite difficult and challenging in our teenage years especially, that's what got us to be more resilient? I just, again, I'm not sure if I'm expressing that correctly or articulating that well, but it's not necessary, is it, to go through that level of hardship?
No, it's not. And I wouldn't... So anyone that's read Peter Attia's book, Outlive, I think he puts it more beautifully than I can in terms of big T and little t when we're talking about trauma.
What's that book about?
So it's called Outlive, and Peter Attia is a very strong advocate around longevity and how do you actually live a health span, not just a lifespan. How do you live healthily into old age? And it's an incredible book. And I'm conscious that I don't want to jump on the bandwagon as well, because he featured on Chris Hemsworth program that came out on Disney Channel a year ago or so. So Peter Attia's fame grew massively because Thor spoke to him.
Yes.
But actually he's been very, very prominent in the research around longevity for a long time, and especially around fasting and a few other things. But he talks about a traumatic childhood of his own, and I won't spoil it for the readers because it's a special book and it's a special moment in the last couple of chapters around the realization of the importance of emotional health, not just nutritional health and physical health and so on, and the difference between emotional health and mental health. But he talks exactly about the question you just asked, and my understanding of the question you just asked is, do you need trauma for growth? And actually, where is the border between allowing our kids to face adversity so that they can build up resilience but not necessitate trauma or really, really hard times? And where is that threshold? And truth be told, I'm not equipped to be able to say what is the right threshold of exposure therapy for our children so that they build up the resilience of hard times. So you're not that helicopter parent or lawnmower parent that's making sure your kids don't have any hard times, but also not inflicting what others like myself or people that have had far, far worse that look back on really dark times. And like you say, truth be told, I don't know what that balance is. I know that I don't always get it right with my kids. I want to get better every day at it, but it's hard to see your kids go through hard times.
It's interesting. And this has just come to me now, and I'm going to make this about me just for a moment, because I had a conversation with my son Rory yesterday, and he's 14, and he's the only child that lives at home. And we are in the middle of a renovation at the moment, which I'm eternally grateful about. It's not hard living in a renovation. The fact that I own a home and can renovate it makes me very lucky. So I allowed Rory to shower in the new bathroom the other day, and when he came in, I've gone and going, "You've messed up the towels and you've messed up this and you've got to dry it." And he said, "But Mum, it's the bathroom. You know, why would you buy towels that we can't use? Why can't we just live in this bathroom?" And I haven't even used it really myself yet. And I thought about it, and I said, "I'm going to get back to you on that." And it took me a day to collect my thoughts. And we're in the car yesterday, and I said, I know what I want to say to you. I said, because I grew up in trauma, and, you know, I left home and school at 15 and, you know, embarked on my life, which I'm very, very grateful to be safe. And I said, that's my perspective on growing up. And I said, you don't have to acknowledge that. You'll never know that perspective that I have on life, and nor should you need to. It's like I don't have a perspective on your life. I can't see what the bathroom means to you. But what I want to say to you is this renovation of the bathroom is not about me having nice things or being proud of my pretty bathroom. It's actually about me feeling actually grateful that I've got to this stage in life where I can have that. And again, I don't want you to pick this up as your own, but I just want you to know that when you go into that bathroom and you see me having nice towels, that's about me being grateful for life. That's not about me having everything lined up. And he said, yeah, I get that.
And I think that's beautiful that you were able to take the time to be able to digest it for yourself rather than responding to the stimulus there and then like a reflex.
Yeah. Well, I had to realise that I didn't want to spend the next, 5 years that he's living at home yelling at him about cleaning up the bathroom, because that just seemed pointless to me. But for him to understand why I needed things a certain way wasn't his responsibility, but it was for him to understand why.
Yeah, and I think that's a strong lesson for both in that environment. You know, if I can be so bold as to sort of replay back what I took from that, it gives another perspective that I think is really important for children, to be able to see a situation from another person's viewpoint, which is hard as a kid, right? It's you're supposed to be selfish. You're looking after yourself.
Those neural pathways are a long way off getting formed. Yeah.
So I think that's a really important lesson. But then I think Dr. Adam Fraser talks about the third space beautifully in terms of that ability to take time in the middle of he talks about it from work and home, and taking that third space to get yourself into the right headspace. But I use that third space in a lot of the talks that I give around what Viktor Frankl talks about in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, of that ability to be human, of choosing how we want to respond to a given stimulus. We aren't just reflex actions, but when we're heightened in our emotions, when we're in often fight or flight mode, we do just respond. And it's inherently human to have the ability to take a few deep breaths, step away from the situation and choose how we want to respond, not just respond. And what you've demonstrated there is you did exactly that. You were trying to understand why you were feeling this way and how you could then put that across in a way that was digestible to your son, to actually have a better tomorrow than just if you'd have gone, put the damn towels back where you found them,
just
or
because,
whatever. Yeah. Which I think has come a long way. I if I go back to the schooling example, that's not what was taught. No. That was these are the rules. You follow them, or you get the cane.
And don't question.
Yeah. I'm adding a bit of mayonnaise onto that because the cane had actually been outlawed just before I joined.
Do you know that capital punishment is still actually allowed in Western Australia and
is that right?
Brisbane?
Wow.
Here in Australia. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Only boys.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, essentially, respond, don't react.
Correct. Yeah. Consciously.
So thank you for indulging me in that little moment. So for you, this now I'm like really tongue-tied on and emotional. I didn't realise how emotional I would get on this show. But you went and studied sports
science.
At university. Yeah. What inspired that?
Well, funny enough, so I'm dyslexic, And so for me to
You're full of surprises.
but for me, what I learned I was very lucky that I was found out to be dyslexic early. So I was able to build up strategies to be able to pass exams and so on. So when I was choosing the universities that I wanted to go to, in the UK, you pick your first one and two, and then you usually have that parachute university, the one that if I have a bad day in the exam room, I'm always going to have somewhere to go to. So I being dyslexic and not necessarily expecting to get the grades that I needed to go to the university that I wanted to, I kind of set myself up of hoping for the best and planning for the worst. I was fortunate that I had great schooling and I had a pretty dogmatic approach to learning, that although I didn't find it natural, I found a way to get good grades, and I got good enough grades to go to one of the best universities in the UK. And I remember when I got the 3 A's, I was then able, if I wanted to go into medicine. And I've always had a really deep-seated desire to help people. And in fact, the fireman that I spoke about a little while ago, the reason why we became friends at 8 years old was because I fixed his tie on his first day of school. We had PE. His mum had done his tie in the morning. He'd then taken his tie off to do PE and didn't know how to tie it. And I did. So I went over and tied his tie. I didn't know this for years and years and years. And it was only years later that he told me, and I can't remember yet. And it's sometimes the way the mind tells more romantic stories than the reality. But I'm not sure whether it was him or his mum that told me of that. The genesis of your friendship was that you went and helped him on his first day at school. And so I use that not to make myself out to be a saint. I don't remember doing it. But I genuinely had this sort of innate desire to help people from a young age.
Wow.
And so medicine made sense. My sister is a nurse.
Tying to medicine.
Well, the helping part, and so I remember thinking about, well, I was always going to go and do sports science because it was, like I say, a way of me continuing doing sport, but not in a professional capacity because I didn't have unfortunately, the skill level to do it. Did I want to be a sports medic? Maybe I could do that instead. And as ridiculous as it sounds, and as we sometimes shouldn't let children make big decisions, especially life decisions, I kind of thought it was cooler to do sports science, go to university, be a sports scientist rather than a medic. As ridiculous as that sounds,
Doesn't it? Actually sounds a lot more sexy.
Well, exactly. And I thought it's why I picked up a guitar, because I thought it would just make me more interesting, right? And so I loved the course. I got to uni having chosen to do sports science. I went to the what is the version of the English Institute for Sport, like the AIS over here. And it's actually the same university where I met my wife. And it was an amazing 4 years. It really was. To be surrounded by elite sports people, to be working with them and to understand what they do and go through to get to their peak is lessons that, to be honest, I'm still using today, and I use with clients and through my practice at Build a Bridge. And there was a real beauty of that. But the downside was it's also doing what you love to do, because I still love to be active. I still love sport and training. If you do that for your career, and if you do that to pay the mortgage, it can sometimes take the joy out of it. And I became, when I worked in elite sports science, and that was the time when I was in Formula One and with the British Olympic gymnast team, started to kill the love of sport that I had that was so deep down. Because
can you just describe that trajectory into those spaces, because they sound very glamorous on paper, because you've sort of gone to university and now you're dealing with Formula One and Olympic people.
Well, it's one of those things where, because it was a very prestigious university, it had links into professional sports, and the road for the top graduate, they got to go to Benetton Formula One that then turned into Renault Formula One. And because I was lucky enough to be that candidate, I was able to go and work with Jensen Button and Fisichella and Mark Webber.
What did you do for them?
So I was a sports scientist for them. So I would do the fitness testing for them, the fitness training with them to get them to be a fitter athlete in the car and to be able to endure a 2-hour race with the G-forces on their bodies and get them into a better physical shape so that they could respond and react better. And
being elite people, you know, there's a certain mindset around that as well. How did they take your the guidance of a younger person who?
Well, don't forget they're quite young too. So a lot of athletes are very young. So it actually was an advantage. And obviously there is a team around them. So I was one of their team. So there were older people that were, you know, giving them more stage advice around life lessons.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to physiology, the numbers tell you the story. So the numbers tell you, have they got fitter, stronger, faster reaction times or whatever. So that wasn't the problem. The problem was for anyone that's watched the show on Netflix, Drive to Survive, that's following the circuit of F1. They talk about the piranha pool. They talk about it being not a nice environment and it's a dog-eat-dog place. And it really was. What I realized was, on the salary that I was on, I would never be able to bring up a family or support a family on that wage. But I had 10, 15, 20,000 people behind me that wanted my job.
Yeah.
And you said yourself, you know, it sounds really cool. And it did.
Yeah.
Going to the pub and telling people what I did was sort of that ego amazing point. Yeah. But I was hating the actual day-to-day of what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that was a real wake-up call of once you've made a plan and set a goal, it's really, really important to assess, once you've achieved something, how's that actually working out for you? And how's that serving you now? And what's the next goal? And what's the next thing that you want to set up? The downside of that, though, for me, was I've always been set on what's the next thing. So it constantly drove this feeling of inadequacy in me because I was always looking at the next rung of the ladder, not the gratitude for what I have right here, right now. Yeah. That's taken a long time to work on. So my career was driven by whether it be that sounds great when I talk about it at the pub, or that sounds great of the day-to-day what I'll be doing. But also, where's this getting me to? This step will get me to X, or this will create this learning that I need for the next step. And that hasn't been the healthiest, if I'm honest, because I've always been looking at that next rung up the ladder.
Yeah. I don't know if you listen to the Imperfects podcast. Oh, gosh. I mean, I wish I could interview you like those guys. They're incredible. But did you hear the Kate Reid interview?
No. No.
Kate Reid, she's the croissant queen here in Melbourne.
Yes, no, I have seen the synopsis of it. I haven't listened to the whole one, but I...
Well, she worked with Formula One over in the UK, and I won't... Anyone listen to that. It's a 2-episode podcast, but she describes that space, fairly similarly, and her experience, she did not come out well. Yeah. Especially being a female in a very male-dominated space. Yeah. In elite sport. Wow.
It's so funny you raise... So you're the third person to recommend listening to that, so I will make a statement now that I will listen to those.
You will not be disappointed. In fact, Rory, aforementioned Rory, made me listen to that because he'd listened to it, and then my other son, George, he's a chef. So he ended up writing to Kate, actually, and so they've since connected. And
amazing! I love that. I love the way they interview, I have to say.
So good.
And the one episode that strikes me more than any other, right in the feels, is when they're talking to Hugh from the Resilience Project.
Yeah.
And the reason may be different. The reason is, and this I think is very much focused on Men's Health Week this week, and very much I think should be on the curriculum for every teenage boy to listen to. There's a moment in there where they're having this really, really authentic, real conversation about guilt and shame and and the ability to be honest with people that you care about and care about you. When they talk about, I felt jealous when you started creating your own friendship and that I was the one that introduced you, and did that demean my relationship with each of you separately? And as embarrassed as they were to say it and feel it, the safe space that they had created to be able to express real love for another male in a friendship form that was vulnerable and okay to talk about things that are shameful in certain aspects, and that the weight of that shame and guilt of feeling like that, but how much heavier that gets when you don't share it and when you don't talk about it and just get it out there. I really wish more especially teenage boys, would listen to that episode and realize that it's okay to be the rugby or footy over here, or that real macho kind of environment bloke, and also have real feelings for the people that you care for in a friendship form, and have those vulnerable conversations and say, you know what, when I introduced you to Rob and you got on really close, I felt this weird feeling and I didn't know how. And if I was a bit weird around the two of you, that's why. Nothing, that's all on me, that's not on you. And have those real conversations that get to a better outcome quicker than 2-3 years going by and potentially friendships being lost as a result of that complex feeling of, this doesn't make me feel good, but actually it doesn't make me feel good that it doesn't make me feel good. And I feel shame that it doesn't make me feel good. And the way they talk about it, I just think is so powerful. And I've been this juxtaposition throughout all my life, and this dichotomy of, I did martial arts and I was okay at rugby and all the real kind of, UFC is my favorite sport, and this real manly quote unquote historical stuff. But I love musical theatre and I cry at the drop of a hat and I'm incredibly emotional, and I've always been teased for that throughout my life. And actually coexisting in both of those spaces, I think, makes me who I am, and I'm proud of that. But it's very hard for people to pigeonhole me, because yes, I've done Thai boxing nearly all my life and I'm okay at it, but I also love to go and watch Les Mis, and I'll cry at adverts that come on the TV, and I love that. But it's taken me a long time too long to get to be okay with that and feel safe.
But do you think that's partly the world that we're creating around, you know, a diversity and inclusion, that, you know, and probably not being so gendered in expectation, that we're allowing that? And I think things like the imperfects, just, you know, it's just such a palatable, inclusive space that they've created. Somehow the beautiful chemistry of the human condition has got it right. We talked off air before about how human beings get movies just right, like A Star Is Born or Dirty Dancing, you know. Bridges of Madison County for my children who are listening in. You know, and they've just got it right.
Yeah.
They could interview a white wall and they would get something from it.
They are incredible at it, but I've listened to some of your podcasts or radio shows and your interactions with humans. You're incredible at it, and you create such a safe space. And I said this off air, and I'd like to say it on air so that your listeners can just feel what I feel and feel what I'm sure they feel every time they listen. There is an incredible value in the space that you create to allow people to hold that space and be who they want to be in that moment, and share things that it's taken me a long time to be able to talk openly about things that I thought, wrongly, that I thought made me less of a man, because I did feel that way. And here I am talking about it on live radio, partly because you've created the space to be able to do that. So I am hugely grateful for the work that you do and the way in which you allow people to be real people, and as ugly and twisted and complex and weird as people are and should be, and the space to be able to work through that and understand where there's real benefits to that. So thank you.
Thank you. That is really something else. Thank you.
I mean it.
Well, there you go. It's very humbling, and I think thanks. Sometimes thanks is all you need to say. Yep.
Sorry, I'm taking the wind out of your sails there.
I'm okay, because again, live radio is as it is. It's not polished. It's just beautiful, and it is such a privilege to be in this really unique space. And for anyone who has not tried radio before, this is community radio. I think it's sexy. I think it's glamorous. Maybe commercial radio is a little bit more, and it's more well paid than us, but. The beauty of radio is that you get to be in this really small, safe space, and you've got no idea who's listening. And I remember David Mann of 3AW, God bless David, he introduced me to radio when I was about 21 years old and really helped mentor me. And I remember he said to me, Rae, when you're on radio, you're talking to one person. That is all. Just imagine a person sitting in an armchair listening to you, and that's the person you're talking to. Don't worry about anyone else. And I think that's something I really take in. Even public speaking, I like to anchor myself to 4 or 5 people in the room who are kind, because I really, really respond to kindness and care. And I think that's why this show is just so emotional today, because you're such the person that you paint, because you do care. And right through from tying that kid's tie. What is your friend's name, the firefighter? Tom.
Yeah.
Is he in the UK still?
He is, yes.
Right.
Still my best friend.
That's how it happens, people. It's not all that fancy, is it?
No, it's not. And humans like human connection, and they need it. We are social creatures, and the ability for me to connect with you today is going to have a beautiful flow-on effect to my afternoon with my family, and my wife gets back from her trip. And there is something that we can't quantify, and we can't see it in necessarily all the science that we have, but we know that it's important, and we know that it has an impact. And we just, my own personal opinion here, but we're not doing enough to cultivate it.
I don't think we're just opening our eyes enough. We just really hang ourselves on this narrative that the world is terrible and look at where it's going and where is it going to end up. It's like, well, if you just stop and have this moment, open your eyes, open your heart, it's all there. It's actually all there. So thank you for reminding us of that. Because, Olly, it's now 15 minutes past our break time, and I don't want to miss these special guest song requests, because I know that they all have a meaning. So, Olly, the corresponding cryptic clue for this one, I think it's got to do with the artist. A way of arranging hair in a neat pattern.
Oh, you've got me here. I'm trying to think of the...
Maybe think of the artist's surname.
Ben Platt.
Correct.
Oh,
ding, 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 ding,
the
ding.
grey matter's not firing. Sorry.
All my cryptic clues are just really, really shit.
No, I'll take this one. That was a good one. That's bad on me. I'll take that. So this one's for my dad, and so Ben Platt is a very big name in musical theatre, and he was fantastic as the lead role, and won some Tonys for it in Dear Evan Hansen, which is way better on the stage than it is in the movie. But he actually is one of the only people to play the role in the movie as well as on stage.
Yeah.
But this song isn't from that show, but it talks about telling people that you care for them, that you love them while they're still with us, and reminding ourselves to take those opportunities. And it also talks, and for me, the words and the lyrics talk about actually everything that I am comes from you. And I wanted to say it in a way that my dad would listen. So I sent this to him years ago, just saying, listen to the words and have a think about what they're saying and how much I love you, and how much me being the father that I am to my children comes from me being the son of you, and seeing how you handled yourself.
How did he respond to the song?
He responded in his normal way, which is very English and stiff upper lip, but in a beautiful way, in his own way.
Yeah. You just have to look for it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Well, when we come back, we're actually going to talk about what it feels like being a dad for you and other things. So don't go away, everyone. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. What a beautiful, beautiful song. Thank you for sharing that with us, Olly Bridge. You're listening to 94.1 FM. It's 3WBC. And you're with Rae Bonney, joined by Olly Bridge. He's dedicated his life to helping individuals and teams unleash their full potential and achieve extraordinary results through a deep understanding of the corporate landscape and the crucial balance between performance and wellbeing. Can't half tell I got that off your website.
Yeah, I know. That's good.
But such beautiful words. Why recreate the wheel when they're already there for you? Now, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to some people that are listening in. First of all, David Willett from East Doncaster. Thank you for listening in, as always. Jenny Thorpe. Jenny, it was great to see you the other day, and also thank you for your enduring support here on the show. And also Jenny suggested a few guests for upcoming shows, so wait till you see them come on, because they're going to be fantastic. Mark Brown. Mark, I'm sorry I've missed you all week, but Mark also has a question. He says, good morning, chunkers, because we call each other love chunks. Oh. It's a beautiful sentiment.
I won't take it personally.
He's having a wonderful time listening in today, but he has a question for you, Olly.
Yeah.
When performance peaks, can this sometimes be to the detriment of someone's work/life balance, such as working excessive hours? Mark, it's a really terrible question, and we are having trouble working it out. But Olly, I'm just going to handball it to Olly.
I think I know the essence of the question in terms of if performing at your peak can actually have a detrimental effect in other areas of your life. And this is where I always come back to, we as creatures are great at ups and downs. So when we're performing at our peak and when we're really striving for excellence, we also need to then marry that with a period of low time. So, if we think about a muscle, for example, when we're training athletes, we need to create the stimulus, the stressor, that is enough to adapt to. So we need to actually create micro tears in the muscle so that the body realizes that, oh, I'm not strong enough. So whatever the training was that you did, created those micro tears that, don't panic, you can only see them through a muscle biopsy. But those micro tears tell the body, okay, I need to rebuild this muscle, but I need to build it stronger. And so that's what progressive overload is, to create adaptation and stronger muscles. That's a really good, I think, visualization tool of saying, to create growth in any area of our life, we do need a stressor, but we need to then follow that stressor up with the right recovery protocol and the right nutritional protocol. So the body has the right fuel to build that muscle. So it's got the protein in the diet and it's got the right necessary makeup to be able to create the new muscle. And it needs to have enough downtime to be able to go through the hypertrophy process to be able to build that muscle. Well, I would say we're terrible at that in the corporate world. If I've got a really big presentation to the board and I'm stressed and I'm putting lots of hours in, for me to perform at my peak in that moment, I need to make sure that I've done all the pre-work, that I'm ready to go, that I'm performing at my peak, and then I deliver it. And then I need to follow it up with the right recovery protocol afterwards so that I don't overtrain and I don't burn out in the corporate space. And so I think the question is, yes, if we continue always at 110%, yes, we will burn out and we will not perform at our peak for very long, which is why for me, the word sustainable needs to always, always be in front of peak performance. Because if we believe that we can perform at our peak every single day, day in, day out, we're kidding ourselves. When we look at the athletic world, most athletes are only performing at their peak very short periods of time. Most of their time is actually the recovery. When we then transpose that over to the corporate world, I don't hear us talking in the same way. We just move from one stressful event to the next stressful event. And very few people, unfortunately, have a great way to marry that high point with a deliberate low point. And I don't mean low point as in sad. I mean low point as in the amount of energy that they're using rather than building.
Oh, I didn't realise that you were going to answer that so eloquently. That was just so beautiful. I think, well, not beautiful, in fact, really, really practical. And I love the kind of the way that you've described it as well, and the picture you've built around, the tearing of the muscle and things like that. And particularly, Mark Brown has texted in, answered the question perfectly, thumbs up, greatly appreciated. And I'm going to give him your account number so you can pay you for that service.
Yeah, real-time feedback. Love it.
That'll be $1 million. Thank you, Mark. But that's, look, guys, listening in, that's a perfect example of what Olly Bridge can do for you in Build a Bridge, because if that's an example of the kind of, it's not even advice, because I guess you're not an advice giver. It seems to me that you deal with every individual representation of the human condition and then apply.
Yeah, well, I hope to. That's my aim. I work in a way, I hope, that comes from a position of, I've seen it work really well. I've been fortunate enough to be in some very, very high performing environments from a team perspective and individual perspective. And my biggest frustration is that I don't see that translating into the corporate world enough. I don't see the lessons that are learnt in elite sport coming across into the boardroom.
Or vice versa sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes. And Clive Woodward, one of the England rugby coaches when we won the World Cup and one of the most successful coaches of all time for England, you talked about the things that he learnt in the business world and bringing them across into the sports world. And he was really successful, like you say, going the other way. But it's far more common to see these kind of practices happening in the sporting arena than I see it when I go to a very large corporate that runs many, many, many teams, but they don't run teams like elite teams.
Yep.
They don't look at it in a way of saying, well, how am I managing the ups and the downs? How am I making sure that people have enough time to recover? How am I actually looking at the periodization of our year and making sure that we know when we need to peak and when we need to detrain to make sure we can peak? And also, what are we doing for our recovery protocols? I just don't see us looking at it in the way that we should.
No, it's a really, really good insight. In fact, speaking of insights in the show and elite sport, I just had a message from somebody who I have not spoken to for a little while, Tim Cherry. Tim Cherry, I met Tim through the Grand Prix probably in about 2011, I think. And we did a lot of great work together, and he was originally out of the AFL, went on through Melbourne Tigers, other elite sport teams as well. And sorry, Tim, I can't remember all of them, but, really sort of got my memories going as you're speaking, thinking about, what he enjoyed as, he's a runner, he's an elite athlete through running, and just the sorts of corporate challenges he came up against during his career of high performance there and high performance here, and how sometimes when he tried to marry them up, they didn't connect.
Yeah, and I think if you try and do it in too much of a literal conversion, you'll run into some challenges. But I think that so what I try and use is the visualization tool of a three-legged stool. So the way in which I help teams and so on try to look after their own balance is a three-legged stool. And I used it with my athletes, and I use it with what I call my corporate athletes now. If you think about a three-legged stool, when all the three legs are on the ground, it's a really solid platform. But actually, if just one of those legs is slightly off the ground, it's unstable and you'll fall over and land on your ass. When I think about getting people to think about that three-legged stool, the three legs are physical activity, nutrition, and recovery. And then I sub-break those down, into 8 keys. What I find is that the physical activity, which I break down to incidental activity and high intensity activity, both have their part. They both need to be done. most people are aware of this, and they either are doing it or they're not, but they know that they need to be standing more, sitting less. They need to lift some weights throughout the week and so on. And we can go into more detail of what the amount those should be. But it's actually the recovery leg that I see the most amount of people neglecting. So nutrition, again, I try and break it down really simply. I just talk about trying to make sure that the right things are going into your mouth, both food and drink, 80% of the time. If we try and eat real food that your grandparents would have recognized 80% of the time, reducing our portion sizes, you can't go that far wrong. Recovery for me is much more important for people, especially in the corporate world, to be focusing on. And I say much more important just because I think it's the one that people aren't doing enough of. And I break down that into gratitude, which we see a lot more in sport than we do in the corporate world, breathing exercises, sleep, and relationships. Those four into that recovery, I think, are absolutely essential.
Ollie, what about when injury occurs? And so we're taking the three-legged stool analogy. When injury occurs and that affects things like mental health, which affects our ability to, say, exercise and consume healthy foods, how do you change that kind of approach then?
Well, the high-intensity exercise start of it would be absolutely modified, but the incidental, breaking up our seated time wherever possible.
But in terms of mental health, just say things like anxiety, depression occur where, in fact, we resort to things like overconsumption of alcohol, overconsumption of foods that make us feel comfortable, that then impact our will or our energy levels to exercise. When you start literally falling down that black hole, what?
Yeah, so
that's a reality.
It is, and this is where the relationship side of things really, really play an important part. So when you are injured, often you won't be surrounding yourself with the same people that you were when you were being active. Hopefully, you're doing it in a group setting, and whether that be faceless no one's in a gym that keep you honest, or whether it be actually a team mentality. The mental health part and the emotional health part of what I talk about is far more related to what we talked about a few moments ago around giving yourself the space, and often that's through breathing exercises or meditation or mindfulness practice, of being able to choose how you turn up and choose how you respond. And things that I don't think is commonplace at the moment, but mindfulness not as a standalone practice that you choose to do at a particular time, but actually mindfulness practice in everyday things that you do. So mindful eating. So if we do mindful eating, we don't fall far down the road that you were just talking about in terms of eating for emotion and eating the wrong things in the wrong quantity. But also mindfulness walking. How does it feel when my foot hits the floor? And being in the moment when we're doing things, so that we start to use the more sophisticated areas of our brain rather than reptilian brain of I feel this and I do that.
Yeah.
So the relationships that we surround ourselves with will help us with that. The breathing exercises that I talk about will help us with that. When we're starting to go down the wrong path, how do we make sure that we've got the right amount of sleep, so that we've got the right internal processes happening, and that we've got the right people around us that are those social positive deviants that get us out for a walk rather than sitting in the room.
I'm going to challenge you, as you know I can, because I guess that feels to me like that's the perfect world scenario for people that are kind of, balanced and functioning. Whereas when we look at things, and I see it a lot in high functioning people in the corporate space who are already substance dependent and masking very, very terrible addictions, really, really life-threatening addictions. Addiction is something else that is not as easy as doing some mindfulness and some breathing and just eating good food. How do we, given that a lot of these people are apparently, elite or high-functioning executives who are trying to manage these other sub-pieces of themselves, do you sort of have an approach to that? Or
So I wouldn't get involved in a situation where there is a professional needed in that, in terms of a mental health professional.
you would send them to me, wouldn't you?
I would. It's really important so we know our boundaries. And so I disagree with the first part of the sentence that you said in terms of I do think that it is deep-seated in the day-to-day practices that we do that will help along the journey. Now, I also know that professional help is, in some instances, absolutely imperative. So being able to have the support around you, and that really comes into my relationships side of things, because part of that is relationships with your therapist or the relationships with whichever professional.
Or even going
you
back
see
to what we
value
said
with.
very early in the conversation today is, surround yourself with people you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So and this is the thing. Relationships are both. Relationships are those people that in a non-professional capacity give you the support that you need at that point, but also those professionals that do. But things like journaling and things like gratitude rituals and things like physical activity, and I know that this conversation started with someone gets an injury and they're not able to do physical activity.
Yes.
But all of these things have a huge impact in the ecosystem that is our body, and that we can't separate what we eat from the way that we feel, the way that we move our body and the way that we feel, and the way that our emotions are affecting us, not just the way we think, but the way that we feel, and that they are all interconnected. And so the reason why that three-legged stool for me is so powerful is that all of the three legs are related to each other. Because like you've articulated, when you get a physical injury, that comes with a huge mental load as well. And if being physically active is your release, is your way of dealing with the day's stressors, if you don't have that outlet, you need to find a suitable outlet to take up the strain of not being able to go and do your run.
That's right, and understanding what resources we have as well for ourselves. And I recently built a resource toolkit for an industry sector. And I'd never done anything like that before, and it was a request that came in. But what came out of it was this massive learning, and I also built this little piece about what I do to manage I live with anxiety and depression as well, and how I manage through the resources that I use and take responsibility. And it was really, really amazing, because I also a year ago gave up drinking alcohol. Big journey for me, because alcohol's always been a fantastic antidote to anxiety and depression for me until it wasn't, and had to make that decision in my life. And so I worked through that, and one of the main resources I use, podcasts, including the Imperfects that we talked about. That's where I get so much of my learning and inspiration around how to self-manage from conversations of other people. That's my little medicine that I use to put that almost fourth leg in that stool.
Yeah, the reason why gratitude is such an important part of the three-legged stool that I talk about is because in sport, often we'll talk about we either win or we learn. Again, I don't hear that a huge amount in the corporate landscape. We either win a pitch or we don't, and then we move on to the next one. We don't actually analyze why did we not win that pitch? What did we through the process? What did we learn about ourselves? What did we learn about our competitors? What did we learn about the landscape, the market? What's the market asking for? We don't do enough of that. Whereas in sport, we do. I didn't perform at my peak for this race. Well, why was that? Was it my preparation? Was it the competitor was just too good? I actually ran a PB, but actually they just were quicker. And was it the second bend that I struggled with? And how can I bring that into my training? And why am I grateful that I had that learning in the pre-season race, not the Olympics? I'm using all those examples because I think in sport we do a great job of actually saying, even in a loss, how can we get the learnings and how can we be grateful for those? In the corporate world, I don't see that enough. And even in people's everyday lives, I don't see that enough. And so one of the things that we have as a non-negotiable in our household is that we do a gratitude ritual around the dinner table every single night. And for my kids, as they've grown older, it's become easier, in all honesty. When they were younger, it was the last thing they played with, or the last toy that they got.
How old are they now?
So I've got an 11-year-old and, well, soon to be 12 actually, and a 10-year-old.
What's it like being a dad?
Oh, it's magic. Like I don't mean to sound romanticized about it. It is hard graft as well, but it is why I became, to being like, I genuinely from a very early age always just wanted to be a dad. And it's been incredibly challenging, and it puts a huge amount of pressure on other relationships and all of the other stuff, but it is the most pleasurable and gifted thing that I've ever had.
Did you take much from your dad's dadding?
I also like that other podcast, How Other Dads Dad by Hamish. It's another great one, because I think
I also listened to that too.
When he raised that the first time and said, as blokes, we don't tend to talk that much about being a dad, and actually the gems that, even if it's just one nugget of gold that you can get from somebody else. And yes, I got some great nuggets from my dad. I think I've modified them to make them more appropriate for the person and the human that I am.
Yes.
And my kids struggle with the amount of vegetables that I always want them to eat. And with my wife traveling this week, the first thing my son was said, "Oh, now that means we're going to have to eat more vegetables because Dad's in charge."
Yeah.
But I did get huge amounts from my dad, and I hope to be 1/10 of the dad that he was to me. I think he was an incredible father. But the essence of the question is, it's the most rewarding thing that I've ever done in my life. And when my kids play back some of the things even that I do with my clients, but I do with my kids just as a matter of course, when my daughter was doing a presentation, she did my box breathing exercise that I did with my athletes and I do with my kids when I'm trying to get them to relax and down-regulate and deal with some scenarios that may be a bit challenging for them. And when I hear them come back and say, "Hey, Dad, I felt nervous and I felt the butterflies, and I heard what you said about our job is not to not feel the butterflies, but just make them fly in formation. And I did your breathing." That, honestly, I heard, it was incredible. I heard those words from my own daughter's mouth, and it was just the most proud I've ever been.
Wow.
Yeah. So the downside of being a parent as well, I'm not trying to diminish. There is huge amounts of stress, and it is hard with two working parents. And I'll be honest, during COVID, with two kids at school age and two jobs, and obviously my wife working full time too, I got to breaking point. It was too much for me. I really, really struggled. But it is equally the thing that puts the smile on my face the most.
It is amazing, and I am going to take the stage again because my three kids, I've been a single parent for all of my parenting, which has been such a blessing. You don't have to do any negotiation about how you're raising your children. But hopefully Tim Cherry is still listening in, because he actually went from all of that elite stuff, and he now dedicates his life, as far as I know, to raising his children.
Wonderful.
Which I know just how much in love he is with that. But I'm sort of going through a bit of a transformation right now, because I'm about to be any moment a grandmother.
Wow, congrats.
So Rose, my daughter, is her and her partner Josh have been very, very kind in providing a grandchild for me. It is my child. Said to them the other day, "So how much do you want to see the baby, when it's born?" So now I have to adapt my 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day occupation to now finding time to be a grandparent. Because I think that's a really, really important role to play. I haven't finished raising my kids. I don't think you ever finish raising your children. They always need you. And, as they grow into adults, they need you for still kid things in an adult form.
Yeah.
How do I take care of Rose as she's becoming a parent herself? But, I might have to hit you up sort of in the next few weeks to say, how do I balance all this out? How do I get everything that I stand for? How do I continue in the work that I do, which is so important, to also embracing this at the same time?
What are you looking forward to the most?
Do you know, I don't know yet, because I don't know this person. I don't know. It hasn't happened.
Yeah. Great answer. And being open to what that human needs and wants. And
Yeah,
Amazing.
because I'm pretty certain it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't. However, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
I've got this sneaking suspicion that being a grandparent is way better than being a parent. I genuinely think that if I look at my parents and how they've responded to, my sister's got 3 kids and I've got 2 kids, and yes, they're the other side of the world, but we're lucky enough to see each other every year pre-COVID, and probably every other year since the lockdowns. But seeing them interact with my kids and have unique relationships with my 2, and also unique relationships with my sister's 3 kids, and they're all incredibly different humans with different interests and different ways of responding and so on, and seeing their response differ depending on which child it is, and uniquely know them and what they want from their grandparents and so on, and just really, really special relationships. That it's, I'm not saying, I don't think that it's that much that it's a cognitive stepping back, okay, it's Willow, what does Willow need? But they've got this real ability, and I think that part of it's they're beautiful grandparents, but part of it's also they've got more time. They haven't got
And
as
experience.
much. Yeah, and experience, spot on. Yeah. They just, I look at the relationship they have, and I really hope that I am blessed with the opportunity to be a grandparent as well, because it's a really special and different bond and relationship than it is when it's a parent relationship.
I would say, in being raised in a trauma environment and probably not getting the kind of parenting that I deserved, to raise kids myself, like I couldn't think of anything better in terms of experience. It just still, like, my heart still races when I'm going to see one of my kids. It's so exciting. I'm about to lose my middle one, George. He's the chef. He's about to leave to go and live in the UK.
Whereabouts?
London.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, he's actually taken up marathon running in the last few. So he runs his own charity for hospo. He works with Attica at the moment with Ben, and but George, when he was about 17, started his own charity, mental health charity for hospitality, to raise the profile of chefs, especially around the stigma and the stereotype that they're angry alcoholics to they're fit, healthy human beings. So he now has a charity called 8 Mile, which he has run. They have a running group every week.
Amazing.
Where he's got hundreds of people now that are part of that. They raise money for homies, I think it's called, so homeless people.
Yeah.
And so he's about to chuff off to the UK. He's going to do the Amsterdam Marathon on his way over.
Oh, good luck.
And so it's sort of like, new child on one hand, not losing him, he's flying out into the world in formation.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I was going with that, but I just, that's
the transition from being a parent.
I can't, like, for me, parenting was almost experiencing a childhood for myself at the same time.
Yeah, interesting perspective. And it's remiss of me not to have canvassed my previous statement of I was very lucky. I had a loving family background, and so my barometer of what is possible is different to others, and different your lived experience. And I had a very, very high bar of what I expected my family life with my kids to be, because I had a very great upbringing and parents and loving, and so they taught me the value of real hard graft and creating a safe and loving space to come home to. And that's what I've really wanted to do for mine. So the other side of that coin is obviously incredibly important and something that I don't have experience of. So my comments.
But when I hear your story of, like, going to boarding school, it's just this horror in my heart to think I could never sustain something like that. Just the feeling of what that might have been like in this continual vulnerability. And quite often we never recognise what we've sustained ourselves or, been able to manage. And I think that's the beauty of human beings, is that we are so adaptable and so agile. we saw it during COVID. No one got the note in the mail to say, hey, heads up, pandemic's coming.
Yeah.
Sort of just happened on the spot. And we did. And again, if you opened your eyes and looked at the beauty and the kindness and the care of and adaptability of people, you saw a lot. There's so much of it.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of work with pharmacists through Build Bridge, and they were obviously the front line of a lot of communities during that time. And they're again, tale of two cities scenario where they made a huge amount of money during COVID, and through commercial terms, they were really successful. They sold a lot of drugs, and they created a very, very good business model, but not without its trauma, not without having vicarious trauma for their staff and staff shortages and aggressive behavior and so on, that has left a really important job to be done of how do we, if we're faced with something similar, how can we do it better?
Yeah.
How can we support our people better, both from a community standpoint and our staff? And it was a really, really interesting conversation and bit of work around that space, because I don't think we use pharmacy as much as we should from a social connection and being that trusted. If we know GP clinics are under the pump and they've got too many people coming through, and we know that social isolation is becoming more and more and more of a problem, there's something in there that we need to be doing more with. And I working with some pharmacists, it's certainly on their mind, and I really hope we can double down on that.
Well, pharmacy has always been a big topic in this studio for me, because how I got into 3WBC was with a wonderful man, the divine Ken Lyons. And Ken Lyons was one of the founders of 3WBC. And just a few months ago, Ken passed away at the age of 98.
Wow.
Ken had 3 pharmacies. He was a World War veteran, a pharmacist, marathon runner. Like, what Ken didn't do it doesn't even exist. But, we always celebrated this pharmacy piece because, as you said, it's a place where you can go that's safe and it's secure. And in my experience raising kids, gives so much better advice than anyone else, really. So, yeah, thank you for recognising pharmacies. But I don't know who's ringing on the telephone, but we can wait until the show's over. There's so many more questions, Olly, that I want to ask you, but I do just want to just give a little bit of a reminding that sometimes in the show we can talk about topics that bring up uncomfortable feelings for people. So if you are feeling like you need some extra support as a result of some of our conversations, please remember there is support there. So Lifeline, the number there is 131114. Suicide callback service is 1300 659 467, and emergency services 000. There for a reason.
Well said.
So I'm going to be back next time on Sunday the 30th of July, which is not, it's usually the third Sunday of every month, but Rory's actually been accepted on a leadership course in Year 9. He got chosen, 3 boys were chosen in Year 9 to go for 10 weeks.
Wow.
So one's going to the UK, one's having a baby, and one's off for 10 weeks. So
there's a mixed bag in there.
It is. I think that says something about the amazing citizens of the world that I've had a privilege in helping raise. They're all doing things. So my guest is yet to be confirmed, but sure to be an enthralling listen. And speaking of highly engaging programming here at 3WBC, coming up next is the divine Paula Hogg, and she's rolling out an entire lazy Sunday afternoon of music and banter, bound to get you very relaxed. And that could have actually been Paula calling on the phone, because she travels here on public transport. Every Sunday she plays her entire show on CDs still.
Wow.
Oh, it's a really, really, really good show.
That's great.
So That's where that's at. But all these other questions I had for you, Olly, um, when you mentioned pharmacy and Build a Bridge, what other kinds of clients do you deal with? And I'm just going to say, one-on-one big corporates.
So I have to be really careful with it because I can't accept too much going on with obviously my full-time role as well. So mainly speaking, it will be to large corporates and teams rather than one-on-one coaching because of a time restraint more than anything else.
Yeah.
My, as you've probably noticed, my love of getting deep and talking around real problems that can be fixed with real solutions is really the motivating force behind it. I also do a lot of work with Drive Against Depression, which because of my love of cars and motorbikes and all things petrol, it's a mental health charity that gets, usually quarter by quarter, gets a group of people together, mainly men, I have to say. 90% of the people that turn up are usually male, with their cars to normalize conversations around how they're doing, mental health and otherwise. And so there's something special about saying we've got a whole morning here, we've got a drive ahead of us that's usually a fantastic drive somewhere around Victoria, and everything is safe. Everything we can talk about, we're not under a time pressure. You've got 30 minutes and chat now, let's go. And Driving Against Depression is just an amazing, for me personally and selfishly, is an amazing way for me I get to present a little bit of what I talk about and be around for the day, and hope that facilitates the right kind of conversations between the group around how they're doing.
Wow.
And
how can people find out more about that, or is it a private?
Yes, they can jump on driveagainstdepression.com.
Yep.
And I think it's .com or .com.au. But the charity runs a quarterly drive event, and the next one's coming up in July. And I'm honoured to be part of that network.
Wow.
It's not my charity, I hasten to add. It's something that I donate my time to because I feel really strongly about it. I went to the first one a few years ago, and just because a friend invited me to go along, and I have a couple of classic cars that I tinker with and took along, and I was instantly hooked. And I went to the organisers and said I'd love to get involved in one way, shape or another, and have been doing it ever since. It's an incredible network. It's an incredible charity doing some really important work.
It sounds amazing. In fact, my beautiful car is in at the doctor's at the moment, it's a 89 BMW.
Which one?
320i.
Nice.
E30.
Excellent.
And that might have to take my car along for a drive.
Absolutely do. Hopefully see you at the next one.
Yeah. If girls are still welcome.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a gender driven thing. It's just what we're trying to do is create around a common, a bit like a lot of footy clubs took the idea around Sons of the West and some brilliant work that was done there. This is a similar kind of mentality of saying, hey, let's bring people together for a love of cars and try and make it a safe space for people to talk about anything.
Yeah.
And we know that whether it be mindfulness driving or, trying to be in the moment is a great solution to some of the challenges that people are going through in their day-to-day lives of losing themselves in a great drive. And we want to create a safe space to be able to do that, knowing that people can rely on each quarter. And there's no bones about it. We want to be the charity for the automotive world. So when organizations like BMW or Ford or whoever want to make a difference, we're the charity they think of.
Great. I mean, one of my favourite clients in the world, Mercedes-Benz Berwick, Craig Howard. Big supporter of my work. Very grateful for that, Craig, but I know that he if he doesn't already know about it, I'm sure.
Craig should definitely have a chat.
He should, definitely. So, Olly, thank you. I had no idea this show was going to feel like this. I'm really stopped for words, but you managed to do that on a few occasions this morning. So thank you for that and sharing just your wisdom, your experiences and everything that I know that's impacted people out there that we'll never know, but we do know.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Now, we've had to rearrange a few songs because we ran out of time to play all four. So you've, hopefully this one is going to work all right, which I'm sure it will. Tell me about the song that you've chosen.
Yeah, so this one's Bruno Mars, and it's just a really upbeat, fun song that I remember when my children were younger, we'd put it on in the house and they call it the hat song. Because in the music video he's wearing a hat, I think that's where it came from, but it just became known as the hat song. And so the kids would grab a hat and they'd do their dance and we'd all just get some energy in the household. And so I wanted to finish on a more upbeat song, and one that just makes me smile thinking about those fun, happy days of energetic kids that just want to get that energy out through dance.
Perfect.